Bitcoin is not just not private, it's actually transparent by design. Like that anything that tries to gain privacy in the Bitcoin space, you're actually having to go against the nature of Bitcoin. And I think that's a really good way to think about when you're using Bitcoin. And so when we're talking about that transparency by design, the most critical thing is that your actual ID, like who you are as a person, is not linked directly to your on-chain activity. Because once that happens, it gets very hard to actually remove that. The way that you enable the most impact from your self-custody is that you ensure that no one has easy means available to see what you're doing with that money. So ultimately, if you have control over who has access to data about what you're doing with that money, you have a lot more power from that stack that you've been stacking. And so think of like privacy as just enhancing the benefits you're getting from Bitcoin and self-custody, and put the same time and effort into it as you did into just the simple process of stacking and withdrawing to self-custody.
Thanks for tuning in. If you're enjoying the show, I would really appreciate it if you could hit the subscribe button, which is the easiest way you could show your support for the show and help it grow, as well as making sure you don't miss out any of the future episodes. And also, I'm proud to announce that my newly launched Become Unruggable Bitcoin Self-Custody Mentorship Program is now live. So if you've been looking for a Bitcoin mentor to help you get your Bitcoin into self-custody, I'm now available to work with you one-on-one. Check out the show notes down below for all the different contact details, email, X, Nostr, whatever you prefer. And also a big shout out to StampSeed for sponsoring the show. Check out stampseed.com for more information. And now let's get the episode underway. Enjoy. Welcome back to Your Bitcoin Story. I'm your host, Gigi, and today we have a returning guest who's a prominent figure in the privacy and freedom tech space, Seth for Privacy. Seth is the VP of Cakewallet, host of Opt-Out Podcast, and a dedicated builder and educator in the world of privacy-focused technology. He's back to share insight on Bitcoin, financial privacy, and tools that empower individuals to take control of their digital lives. Seth, welcome back to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be back. I really enjoyed the last conversation that we had, which somehow was a year ago. Somehow that feels like no time and like a lifetime has passed within that year. Like, I don't know why this
100%.
like duality of time exists, but yeah, it's been a whirlwind of a year, but really glad to be back chatting with you.
Thanks, man. Thanks for taking the time. And yeah, it does feel like it wasn't that long ago. And here we are a year later, minus a Bitcoin Q&A that was with us on the first one, as back then you were still part of the foundation team. And since then, a lot has changed in your personal life. A lot has changed in the general Bitcoin scene. You know, not to list all the things on the top of my head, but kind of just to first of all touch upon a little bit on your personal journey, because you've had some big changes. So as I mentioned, being at Foundation, you were there for quite some time, and now you are the VP of Cakewallet. How's that transition been for you, Seth?
Yeah, it's been honestly fantastic. I mean, getting to spend time at Foundation, I was there for I think just under 2 years. I mean, that was my start in the space. Like I'd been thinking about what it would look like to get into the space for a long time, and then probably about 6 months before I joined Foundation, started to look more seriously. But I had kind of made this commitment up front that I wasn't just going to jump into whatever job was available, but I wanted to make sure that the actual company, the organization I was joining, was really aligned with my ethos, that they really saw things in a very similar way and we're actually building freedom tech. So it was awesome to be able to jump in at Foundation. Absolutely love those guys. Q&A is a good friend, especially. And so we keep up. They've got awesome stuff coming down the pipeline as well with Passport Prime, and we're collabing with them at Cake as well. So there's a lot there to continue to love. But one thing that kind of became clear while I was at Cake was the initial goal, or while I was at Foundation, the initial goal was not that I was going to be doing marketing. Basically, like content creation, podcasting, blogs, that sort of thing was going to be the focus, and not the like broader marketing business dev side. But just some things happened and I got thrust into that role, and it was a really good learning experience. Like I feel like there are a lot of things that I'm doing now at Cake that I would have never been able to do or been able to do as well without that learning experience. But I also realized I hate marketing so much. Like I despise having to do it myself. I despise how the algorithms work on social media and how like beholden we are to how X decides to shift their algo, or how Instagram does everything. Like we're so controlled by how they set up their algorithms. And it was just driving me nuts. So I knew that it wasn't something I wanted to do long term. And I'm also just like, I'm a technical person in background and in interests. Like I love getting into the nitty gritty details. So I knew that I would want to get into something that allowed me to do a little bit more of the technical work as well. This opportunity at Cakewallet popped up. I've known Vic, the founder of Cakewallet, I think the year he launched Cakewallet, which was 2018, or no, it was the year after. It was 2019. The first Monero conference happened that year, and that was my first conference that I ever went to in this space. Long before I had a Twitter account or anyone knew me. I met him there, and ever since then we've been connected. And he's just one of the most fantastic people in the space that I've ever met. Just like a kind, genuine, interested person who really just wants to build stuff that he enjoys and that other people can actually benefit from. And I've just found over the years that seeing him work and seeing him build out the Cake team, it was always something that was really interesting to me. And then a few things changed. They needed someone to step in and really kind of run the business day to day, because Vic also has a whole other side business that takes up a lot of his time. And it seemed like a perfect fit. So I've been absolutely loving it. I mean, just like with any small company, you know how it is. You're running your podcast on your own. Like, you know how many hats you have to wear to be able to do anything when you're not a 300 person organization. And it's the same way at Cake. So we're 15 full time, I think. And what that means is that I'm VP. I run a lot of the day-to-day business, but also do all the business dev, do a lot of QA testing, like do our infrastructure. Like there's just a lot of little things that happen. But I've really enjoyed the transition. The Cake team is absolutely fantastic. And overall, really, my favorite part is just that I actually get to work on like privacy preserving freedom tech every day and make it better and like push the boundaries in a way that I haven't been able to do in the past. So that's been absolutely fantastic.
Amazing. I'm glad to hear that, and I'm glad that you're still on good terms, and there is close collaboration happening with your old friends at the foundation with the Passport Prime coming out. I'm really excited to see that product, and a Bitcoin Q&A has been teasing there's a new Passport itself, like a redesigned edition that's about to come out. So that should be exciting as well.
I think they just announced it actually before we hopped on. Yeah, it's just
really
like a stealthed out version. Yeah,
I saw
it looks
the black.
amazing.
It said coming soon, but has it been fully announced now?
They like just shipped a tweet thread about it.
Okay.
It's not. I think you can purchase it now, and then it ships in like 6 weeks. They're building them right now. But yeah,
nice.
It's stealthed out, like black and gunmetal. I'm definitely gonna have to. I don't know. I already have a pre-order to Prime. I already have a Passport Core right now. Like I shouldn't buy another one, but
well, there you have a 3 of 3 multi-sig with each individual passport, right?
It's true. It's true. The opposite of multi-vendor, multi-sig. Single vendor, multi-sig. Just lean into it.
Just go with the loyalty. You trust them. You've seen what happens on the inside, so I guess you get it clear. True. You don't have to like guess what happens on the production front. But yeah, no, Seth, it's been incredible seeing you transition, and especially with Cakewallet, which from my understanding, Cakewallet, I'll be totally transparent. I don't have too much experience with it, but from the research that I did, it's very focused on privacy, especially because it primarily launched as a Monero wallet. Is that true or not necessarily?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Vic launched it in 2018 as a Monero only wallet. He's been in the Bitcoin space since like 2010 or 2011. So he's pretty OG when it comes to the Bitcoin world. And had long been searching for just like what is actually useful day to day. And I know I don't want to tell too much of his story because he tells it better than I do, but one day he used it to test out buying something on a darknet market, not drugs. I think it's like antibiotic, just as a test to kind of see like
legal drugs.
This thing. Yeah, legal drugs, I guess you could say. And his account got banned at Coinbase, and he noticed that like they were able to see exactly what he had done with these funds, even though he had sent them himself. And it kind of opened his eyes to like, okay, something's not right here. Like the exchange I use should not be able to see what I do with my funds after I withdraw them. Something's a little broken here. And that kind of woke him up to privacy more generally in cryptocurrency. And at that point, Monero was really the only privacy preserving cryptocurrency. And so he leaned into that. There was no Monero wallet on iOS at all. So Cakewallet initially launched. It was multi-platform, Android and iOS, but the primary reason was to fill in that gap with iOS wallets, and then has rapidly expanded since then to encompass a lot of different cryptocurrencies. The big focus for us really is Bitcoin and Monero. And then a kind of a tertiary focus on Litecoin, since that's such a popular one for people to actually just make payments, swap between cryptocurrencies. It's really, really popular for that. And there's some cool privacy tech on that we've been building, but don't want to jump into too many details yet.
Amazing. We'll touch upon that because I'm kind of more interested on, and I have one question for you, leading up, Seth, with regards to how to help and increase your privacy on the Bitcoin protocol, because that's something that's really dear to your heart and to me as well. I think privacy should be kind of a natural thing that people should have a choice of. It's not like you have to earn it. It's more of like, do the right choices to preserve your privacy more, instead of you trying to hide something. It's not like we're all illegal drug dealers, but like, we just don't want to give, like, why give our information to third parties that we have no idea where they store that data, what they do with that data. And in most cases, that data gets hacked and leaked, and then we get spammed, and who knows, even worse, we could potentially get robbed because we inputted our own personal data on someone else's server that didn't care about preserving it. So before we get into that, and maybe like a transition question to that, is you've been a big proponent of CTV and CSFS, which you even have, I believe, in your Twitter name is part of it. So maybe you could share a little bit, what is the latest developments on that front? I remember some 6 months ago, there was a lot of debate and discussions, but today, in my opinion, and I want to hear your take, but like, it's much harder to push forward protocol proposal on Bitcoin than it was, for example, in 17, 18. It was a much smaller circle, and now there's much bigger players, even to some extent nation states involved. How do we move forward with CTV, and where do we stand on that front, Seth?
How much have you gotten into the topic of covenants with your audience? Is that something where you can point
tip
to other
of the
episodes?
Iceberg. Like, maybe we could take it right from the basics.
Yeah, I'll just give a really quick intro. Like, we don't need to get too technical. First, kind of what are covenants, then we can talk a little bit more about what it would mean to activate covenants on Bitcoin. Really, what covenants are, there's a ton of debate and writing and nuance and confusion around what covenants are. But ultimately, what the simple form of covenants, that would be where I would classify CTV, which is opt check template verify, and then CSFS, which is opt check sig from stack. Essentially, what these allow you to do is simple covenants. So what that means is that if I want to ensure that when I send these funds to this address, or when I receive these funds to this address that I create, I want to make sure that they can only be spent a specific way. And so instead of just the current system, which is basically, if you have the private key, you can spend the funds. If it's a multi-sig, obviously you need multiple private keys, but that's basically the only spending condition that you can have right now, with some exceptions. What covenants will allow you to do is to ensure that when funds are sent to an address that was created with this specific covenant script set up, only these specific things can happen. And that can sound kind of complex and scary, but really all that means is the things that we currently used pre-signed Bitcoin transactions for are basically, Lightning is an example of this. There are other protocols like Arc that are being built that are an example of this. The way that you do the protocol right now is that you're constantly signing different potential transactions that could be submitted to the network and handing them over, getting an update, getting it back, re-signing it. You're doing these rounds where you're constantly signing these transactions and passing them back and forth, even though you're not actually submitting them to the network. And you're doing that because you need to capture what happens in all of these different scenarios. How can I make sure that I get my funds back, or that we're able to do this collaborative transaction, or that if I force close my channel, I get funds back? Like, there's all these different potential outcomes. And right now, there's no way to bind when funds are in this address, what can happen after that, other than something like a multi-sig. So what covenants do is basically, instead of having to create all of these pre-signed transactions for every possible path that these funds could take, we can create those paths within the covenant and just have the simple transaction with that covenant script. And so then those funds can only, by Bitcoin consensus, they can only be spent in the proper ways. So like in a, let's say Arc, for example, which is a scaling layer 2 for Bitcoin that'll be kind of symbiotic with Lightning. That's ensuring that either the Arc entity can rotate these funds into a new round when I allow them, or I can exit on chain, and making sure that only those things can happen, nothing else can happen. So it's just a way to ensure that what I want to happen with funds is the only thing that can happen. And a note that people often get confused with is no one else can set these rules for your funds. You set these. If you're the one receiving funds, you're the one who sets these conditions or doesn't within your wallet. No one else can set these if they're sending funds to you. Like an exchange can't say, I'll send you these funds, but only if you lock them into this script. You would have to choose to do that for that to be able to actually happen. So that's a still relatively long explainer of covenants. I'm sure there's some more concise explainers out there. But basically what it does is it just allows us to build better layer 2s, better protocols, better tools on top of Bitcoin, including potentially better privacy tools. So that's kind of the TLDR of covenants. Now, when it comes to actually activating them, you're right that we're in a very different world right now than we were like when I first got into the space. One of the things that was very interesting to me when I first got into the space was that there were a lot of discussions around what could happen with Bitcoin. What can we improve? What can be changed? It was shortly after SegWit had been activated was when I got in, and there was still a lot of discussions around potential improvements to Bitcoin. A lot of work going on in privacy, and that has really shifted. I would say really since like 2020 to now. One of the prevailing narratives is we should never change Bitcoin, that we need to leave it as it is and not touch it, except in the case of some massive bug or emergency. And that, I think, has become a key narrative because of this shift from Bitcoin being more than just digital gold to a lot of the narrative shifting to almost exclusively digital gold. This idea of like, we just want to save money in it. We just want to store wealth. We don't care as much about the other use cases. And obviously there are exceptions.
Strategic stockpiles of the world, right?
Exactly. I mean, if your goal is, I just want this thing backing my nation's fiat, like you don't want it to change. You don't care if people can use it in a peer-to-peer manner. You don't care if it has privacy. You just want to make sure that it's as stable and secure as possible. And so that, like, as we begged for institutional investors for years, they came. We begged for banks to come for years, they came. We begged for governments to come. They came. Every time this happens, the bar to actually get something changed in Bitcoin increases. So I think we're at a very difficult place right now to actually make a change in Bitcoin. And I think you could see that in the discourse around covenants on Twitter, that it's pretty, I don't know, there's a lot of consensus around like CTV and CSFS. Or that's the explicit proposal that I think it has the clear consensus among people who enjoy covenants and want to see them activated. But there's still a lot of people who just kind of shrug their shoulders and say, like, we're not changing Bitcoin. We're not going to do it. Or you have to prove that there's like overwhelming support for this, or that you have to prove that there's like 18 different use cases ready to go for this, or that there's companies building on this. And that kind of like bike shedding and constant changing of what the bar is makes it very difficult for anything like this to happen. And like, on the one hand, I understand it. Like you obviously want to be cautious. Like you don't want to just be upgrading willy-nilly, or any proposal that's made seriously considering soft forking it in, because obviously there is a diminishing return on making changes, even if they're positive ones, because every time you make one, there are risks involved. Like, anyone who's honest would agree that there are risks involved. But something like CTV and CSFS are extremely simple, extremely well understood, extremely well vetted for the last 5 years. They're very, very simple changes. And so I'm hopeful that they can get across, because a lot of the self-sovereign use cases of Bitcoin are already very difficult today, if not impossible, privacy being one of those, and will only get more difficult the higher fees go, more nation states and institutional investors get involved. So I think it's important that we provide the building blocks today that developers might need down the road, or do need today.
Yeah, I agree as well with you on that one, Seth. There was a lot of discussions with, especially now, which was crazy to me, just over a month ago when the mempool cleared. It felt surreal that, like, we're in the midst of, we're like at 100K, Bitcoin 100K, and the mempool like clears. There's no transactions happening on chain. And then everybody's kind of like, well, what's the point of, Lightning and all these L2s, like I can do a transaction for like, 20 cents on chain. But then it's about, you can do it now, but what's it stopping it, from fees going from that 1 sat VByte to like 100 sat VByte in like a real short period of like a week. And then everybody's crying again, wow, it's so expensive. So these are kind of the periods of when, you can put forward, test out, implement, and kind of develop and get things ready for when it's needed. And if it's not, well, hey, at least you have a backup. But maybe at some point it will be needed. The more people that, try to get on chain and hold their own UTXOs, which to recently, the kind of the conversations I've been having is that, like, the majority of people in the world won't be able to hold their own UTXOs. It's all going to be L2 solutions, most probably custodial or non-custodial, but like holding a UTXO on chain will be like a big thing. Like, you've been early in the game to hold your own UTXO. So we will see. Like, once again, we're still so early, 16 years into Bitcoin coming around. Like, I feel like we're only getting started where things are about to go. Not focusing on fiat prices that could be distracted, could be manipulated. do go up and down, but more importantly, like how things are developing, I think we still got a long way to go. When I speak to the average normie outside, they have no idea about Bitcoin, let alone UTXO, let alone CTV proposals. But in the sense of, as you said, Seth, this has been, discussed and tested out for like close to 5 years. Like how long, like, do we wait another 5 years for it to get implemented, or this could be something fairly quickly now that it's been around for a while and discussed, and the majority of consensus, I also feel like people are for it. It's not like a small block versus big blockers fight. It's more like this makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, I on like the code side, there's not really that much. Like you said, this has been there for 4 or 5 years, I think, with the specific code available for like 4 years. So this is something that's like very well understood there. So there's not really any like waiting around for that. Really, at this point, it's trying to figure out like how the hell do we actually
vote for it?
Yeah, how do we decide should this be included in Bitcoin consensus or not? And that is like the question for the ages right now, because if you ask any developer in the Bitcoin space, you'll get probably a different answer on exactly how that should work. And the things that have been done in the past are generally regarded as not a good idea now. There's like the way that activation worked for Taproot is something that I know there's a lot of division over whether their speedy activation should ever happen again. That's where it gets kind of ridiculous. And that's like I don't want to say downside, because it's like it's necessary, but it is one of the downsides of decentralization and of rough consensus. Like consensus is very, very rough. We don't even have consensus on how to get consensus. Like that's how rough it is. So we're kind of like, we've been stuck for, I feel like, probably about a year now with, okay, we need CTV. I think there's pretty broad consensus among developers that CTV would be good. There's obviously some holdouts, but pretty broad consensus amongst developers. But basically things stalled at how do we actually get this activated? And that's, I think, will change in the next like 3 to 6 months. There's a renewed effort, partly by Jeremy Rubin, who was the original author of CTV. He's kind of come back and is trying one last time to get CTV across the finish line. There's a bunch of other developers who have jumped in the last year or so to help both on the code side and the activation side. Like I really am optimistic that we'll have a client that lets you signal to activate CTV probably within the next like 6 months. And then we'll just kind of have to see what happens after that. But since there's like the biggest problem right now is basically there's no like defined way of how you get consensus. So a lot of like there have been multiple different activation clients created and lots of discussions around it where people are called like malicious or anti-Bitcoin or like trying to destroy Bitcoin simply because they suggested a way to get consensus. And it's so divisive right now. So I think that's the main part right now. It's not really on the specific proposal, because CTV and CSFS are very well understood. They give us a very good set of tools to use in building things with basically, I mean, I would say no downside. Obviously, there's always this kind of unknown unknowns thing, but they're so simple that there isn't really a downside to them, in my opinion. And so now we're just trying to figure out how do we actually signal, do we want this or not? Some really good efforts that are not like on-chain consensus signaling have been on the Bitcoin wiki. So there's a page where developers have been adding what different proposals in the covenant space do they support, what do they not support, what's their rationale for supporting or rejecting specific proposals. And then they've also just kicked off on the wiki page a place for, it's called economic nodes, basically just like entities in the ecosystem like Cakewallet to signal, do you support covenants? Like, will you build things on covenants? That sort of thing. So like Cakewallet was the first one I worked with. I don't know what you want to call him. Floppy disk is kind of what we call him in the space, but 144,000 bytes or something is his Twitter handle. But he's the one who's been maintaining the wiki page and worked with him and got that economic node section started. And Cakewallet was the first to signal support specifically for CTV and CSFS, because I think it's the safest, most possible way to implement covenants. Well, there's many there. So that's a very important way. I think also, like, as silly as it sounds, there's like some really good master threads on Twitter of people signaling support for CTV and CSFS. So like there's some where someone's just gone through and just screenshot everyone's tweet or bio or whatever that supports it, so that people can start to get an idea of like not everyone is going to need to signal support, but most people are going to just follow people that they trust. If we're really being honest, there are very few people who actually are going to understand and vet the code or the way that the consensus change itself would work. There are very few people who will do that. most people are going to follow and trust either their influencer or developers that they highly respect or the technical individuals at their company. And so getting an idea of who in the space verbally and vocally supports this is really helpful for others to understand, like, okay, well, like these 3 developers I really trust. I followed them for a long time. They're signaling support. So like I'm going to signal my support. And a lot of times that's how the social side starts. But the actual like on-chain activation part is still pretty fuzzy.
Interesting. Yeah, well, I hope as well, Seth, that, in the coming months, by end of the year, we get an activation and it rolls out. Maybe the what was it called? The White House Crypto Summit could have put it up to the vote if they're pro or against the CTV implementation.
Well, you joke, but we're going to be there soon, man. Like it's easy to think of this as like, well, we've had 16 years. Why are we rushing this? Like we don't need to do this now. Like we don't need better layer 2s right now. Lightning's fine. Like it's easy to make those excuses, but also forgetting that in the last like 5 years, the ability to get something across the line, I would say, has gone up dramatically. And we're just crossing this cusp of like just in the last year, we got ETFs and government adoption, if you want to call it that. So what do we think that's going to do for getting a proposal across the line that changes anything within Bitcoin? That's going to just make it even more hard, exponentially more difficult to get something like that across the line. And that's only going to ramp up as, with the US starting their stolen Bitcoin reserve, as I'll continue to call it, other nation states are going to jump in and do the same. They're going to follow that lead, and it's just going to compound the difficulty here. So when we talk about something like, yeah, you can do whatever you want right now. It's 1 sat per byte. Like it doesn't cost much at all. But that's not going to last forever, because if it does last forever, Bitcoin's dead because there's no security. And if it doesn't last forever, fees are very high. There's security, but very few people can actually transact on chain regularly. So like we need to solve the problems far, far, far before we actually get to the problem phase. And I feel like, rapidly running out of time to actually change anything about Bitcoin.
So we went from a positive swing to a more negative swing, but it's good to see both sides of the coin and kind of give some urgency of the matter. As that saying goes, it's better to have an umbrella before it starts raining than start looking for an umbrella when it's like, pouring it outside. So I guess hopefully we grab this umbrella in time before the storm comes in and we're out looking for that umbrella. To transition out a little bit, but still focusing on kind of preserving kind of the efficiency and privacy aspect of Bitcoin transactions. Since our last talk, more or less a year ago, the BIP 352, the Bitcoin silent payments have been steadily rolling out to more wallets, including Cakewallet, and there's quite a few of them now. How, in your eyes, how has that, so to say, adoption and implementation been coming along since we last spoke?
Yeah, it's been going, honestly. It's a little bit of a slow process just because a lot of the ways, so like to give people a little bit of background, like your favorite wallet probably is not making most of the code for the basic functionality of Bitcoin in-house. Most likely what they're doing is they're using some upstream library, something like BDK, Bitcoin Dev Kit, or there's many other options, whether it's Lightning, maybe it's Lightning Dev Kit, tons of different libraries out there that are maintained by people upstream, and then your favorite wallet developer builds their wallet on top of that library. But that library is what does a lot of the core functionality for Bitcoin. And that's the case for pretty much every wallet out there. It's the case for Cakewallet as well. And so when something like silent payments comes out, it takes a long time to actually roll back into those libraries upstream. Mostly because there's just a lot higher overhead for actually getting something in them, because obviously they have a lot of wallets depending on them. They have a lot of moving parts. They need to ensure that things are really, really solid. And so that's been, I think, the slowest piece so far, is like getting silent payment support natively in Bitcoin Core, natively in BDK, natively in a lot of the different libraries that are used in this space. Just takes some time, but there's people doing really good work on that. Specifically, Josie Bake is one of the authors of the BIP and has been doing just amazing work behind the scenes, getting that into things like BDK. And once that happens, like once these upstream wallet libraries have support for silent payments natively built in, where your favorite wallet dev can very simply enable them, it's going to cause just a massive cascading effect of adoption. So I'm excited for it and hopeful. Right now, there's not too much adoption yet, but a lot of that has just been because it's pretty difficult. Like at Cakewallet, we had to build everything from scratch, like the server side, the client side, the wallet. It's all done in-house from scratch. And most wallets are not going to do that because they don't prioritize privacy in the same way that we do. And that's not to rag on other wallets. There's different priorities there. So once it's not something that you have to build in-house, I think it will rapidly grow in adoption. But on that front, I think like it's also just tricky because when you're at the very forefront of a new thing within the space, you're talking about like you're testing in prod in a sense. Like not really, like obviously we're testing internally at Cake, but you can't really predict exactly what's going to happen in before you deploy to 500,000 users. Like it's a whole nother ball game of load on the servers, of how exactly the sync process is going to work across different networks. There's a lot of moving parts. So a lot of like that this last year has been kind of growing pains of us at Cake trying to figure out, working with silent payment devs, working with people in the space, working with indexer and node implementation devs to try and figure out what's the best way to actually approach this. And thankfully, I'm really excited. We're actually working directly with Josie Bake now, the silent payment dev that I mentioned. He's kind of acting as an advisor basically to Cake and helping us to build out both the server side and the wallet and make it much, much better. And then the ultimate output of that is obviously we don't want to keep it as a Cake only thing. Like we want more wallets to adopt it. So everything that we're building, I mean, it's already open source, but everything that we're building will have a heavy focus on open source, obviously on self-hosting, because one of the critical things with silent payments is that kind of the ideal user experience is that you run a Start9 or an Umbrel or a Embassy, whatever your favorite variant of a node at home is, and you just click a button to enable a silent payment server. And then when you connect to that server with your Cakewallet, for instance, you send your scan key, which is not, it doesn't allow you to spend funds, but allows you to see silent payment transactions that you receive. You send that scan key to your server that's running at your house, so you obviously trust it. And then 24/7, that server is scanning for payments. So when you open your silent payments wallet and Cakewallet, at that point, you get the same user experience from a sync perspective as a naive, non-privacy preserving Bitcoin wallet. But you're actually getting fantastic privacy as a receiver. Obviously, there's lots of caveats. Silent payments doesn't solve all privacy problems, but it does provide a really, really good improvement on just like the entire address model. And you can get that with the same user experience as current non-privacy preserving wallets. That's really the end game. That's what we're working towards. Josie's been a fantastic help already. I think really in the next like 2 to 3 months, I'm excited for where we get in the silent payments user experience. And everything that we're doing at Cake, like this is why I love open source so much and why I would never work it anywhere now. Obviously, unless like my family's lives depend on it or something, but like if I have a choice, I'll never work anywhere that is not free and open source software. Because everything that we're building, like the thing that makes me so excited to build these things is that obviously, yes, we're benefiting Cake and Cake's users, but everything that we're building is also just contributing back to the broader Bitcoin ecosystem. And like that's just, it's just an absolutely amazing thing to me. Like it blows my mind every time I realize like how many others can build on top of these things and hopefully will build on top of these things. How many people will hopefully be running a silent payments node extension, whatever you want to call it, a silent payments sync server at their house because of the things that we're building now, because of the work by Josie Bake, because of the amazing work by Ruben Thompson and creating silent payments. Like it's just amazing to see how that can have just like this massive ripple effect.
Yeah, no, and best of luck to all the development. I'm really looking forward to seeing it and give it in a go on my Start9. I would love to run it myself and see how it works on that end. Maybe I'll also spin up a little review and DIY video how other people can do it too, because that's kind of something I'm leaning more towards, not just doing the podcasting aspect, of course, my self-custody mentoring, but also doing some like easy follow tutorial videos for people, you know, to become a little bit more self-sovereign and with new developments happening, I would love to explore those things more. So I'm really looking forward to that one. On the sense, I guess one next question I want to ask you, Seth, is since kind of predominantly people that listen to the show have been in Bitcoin for some time, but also we are getting like newer people, especially in the last 12 months. There's been, as the Bitcoin price was rising and as, you know, kind of Bitcoin was discussed everywhere on the political spectrum, there's more and more people that kind of have entered Bitcoin in the last few months. And now they're starting to realize slowly that kind of Bitcoin is not as private as initially they thought it was. And privacy to some, not to everyone, but to some people like myself and yourself as well, of course, is something that is very dear and kind of we value very highly. So as an easy like top of your head at the moment, someone that's starting their Bitcoin journey, what are like some practical steps that you would give them in order to try and preserve their privacy? Because I think that's something that's super important that people should focus more on, essentially starting their journeys today.
Yeah. I mean, it's a fantastic question and one that has gotten much more difficult to answer since April of last year, which was when the previous administration in the US basically just went wild trying to shut down any privacy technology on Bitcoin and even in the broader cryptocurrency ecosystem. So our choices have gotten much more difficult. especially with actual like transactional privacy within the Bitcoin space. I think actually, if I'm not mistaken, right now the latest court case for the Samurai wallet hearing is happening in New York. So hopefully we'll have good outcome from that, and that case will go well, and we'll be able to build privacy tools more openly in the future. But unfortunately, that made things far more difficult. So like the off the top of my head recommendation, I feel like is much trickier today. But I do think there are some really practical solutions here. I mean, the first and foremost, the most important thing that anyone can do, and the way to get like what I view as the base level of privacy that everyone should seek, is don't buy your Bitcoin on a centralized exchange where you give over your ID. And I know that advice sounds harsh if you've only ever used something like River or Swan or whatever, because the user experience there is just so easy. And I definitely understand that as someone who was using only centralized exchanges that I gave over my ID to for years. The loss there is that due to Bitcoin's lack of privacy, and I think like a really good reframing that Jameson Lopp was talking about when we were in when we were at Lugano at the Plan Before, he was talking through like this idea that Bitcoin is not just not private, it's actually transparent by design. Like that anything that tries to gain privacy in the Bitcoin space, you're actually having to go against the nature of Bitcoin. And I think that's a really good way to think about when you're using Bitcoin. It's not just that it's not private, it's that it is intentionally and overly transparent, which has some benefits, of course, the auditability, like the simplicity to actually understand what's going on in Bitcoin, but obviously has massive downsides. And so when we're talking about that transparency by design, the most critical thing is that your actual ID, like who you are as a person, is not linked directly to your on-chain activity. Because once that happens, it gets very hard to actually remove that, both from the sense of obviously then the government or any nation state who has access to that info, or hackers, like you mentioned earlier, who get access to that info. They know exactly the size of your stack. They know where you've withdrawn it to, if you've withdrawn it. Maybe they know where you live, unfortunately, if they get your ID itself. Like you're opening up yourself and your family up to major risks from that perspective. But then also just on the other side of when you're actually spending, you have to remember that this exchange, if you don't take really now honestly difficult steps in between, this exchange knows who you are, they know where you withdraw your Bitcoin to, and they can very trivially trace the Bitcoin from that point on and see where you spend it. Obviously, there's a lot of caveats and nuance when we talk about privacy. There's a broad spectrum, but that's kind of the base state that most Bitcoiners live at, is that they bought it on something like Coinbase. They've maybe withdrawn it to cold storage, hopefully, or withdrawn it to a hot wallet, and then they're spending it on things. And that full path is totally transparent, and Coinbase knows exactly who you are. They know where you live. And if anyone gets access to that database, they also have all of that same info, because anyone with a Block Explorer can follow the flow of funds for most people's usage quite easily. So that sounds very doom and gloom, but it's important to kind of set the stage for what the expectation is when you get into Bitcoin. And thankfully, the expectation of Bitcoin is private or anonymous has long since died out. So like I'm thankful for that, because that was extremely dangerous, that people came into Bitcoin thinking it was this like drug coin and it was super anonymous and super private, and like that has never been true. It's just that the tools to trace it have gotten better, and the incentives to trace Bitcoin have gotten better. So getting to practical steps, that was a really long intro. Practical step number one is just don't buy on a centralized, what we would call a KYC exchange, an exchange that has to collect your personal info, but instead use something like Bisq, which I wouldn't recommend for beginners, and has the secondary downside of you have to actually already own Bitcoin to buy Bitcoin on Bisq, which sounds a little weird, but it makes sense once you understand how Bisq works. But something like RoboSats, I feel like, is starting to kind of take the place of number one in my eyes for buying and selling Bitcoin in a way that's peer-to-peer. So you're buying and selling directly with other people, other Bitcoiners, and it does not require your ID in any way. And that's not like using these tools is not illegal in any major jurisdiction that I know of. Buying and selling peer-to-peer is not illegal. So it's not, you're not skirting around the law or anything like that. You're just choosing to trade with regular people instead of a centralized entity who has to collect that info. The regular people do not. There are some financial limits and stuff that most people don't need to worry about, but that's the best. Like if you start there and you just switch to buying or selling Bitcoin on a no KYC exchange like RoboSats, like you're already miles above anything else that you can do beyond that point. Because at that point, the worst case generally is someone can see that you have a certain amount of Bitcoin. They don't know who you are. They don't know where you live. It's going to be very hard to figure out that detail unless they're like a nation state actor or law enforcement. And so you break this connection between who you are, where you live, maybe who your family members are, with what your actual on-chain activity is or how much you have. So that's the first step and the most important one. Beyond that, things get really murky with Samurai Wallet being gone, with Wasabi Wallet shutting down and being run essentially by third parties now. With the complexity of join market, like I don't have a great recommendation for how to achieve good on-chain privacy nowadays, other than try not to use on-chain and use Lightning as much as possible in a self-custody wallet, not Wallet of Satoshi or something like that, where they have full visibility into what you do. But something like Phoenix Wallet is not perfect when it comes to privacy, but again, much better than the norm on-chain. Or something like Zeus Wallet would be even better. Zeus Wallet's kind of the ideal. In my mind, still some user experience stumbling blocks, I think, for a very, very new Bitcoiner. But for anybody who's been in the space for a while, I think we'll be really comfortable using Zeus. And then Phoenix is just like dead simple. Works really well and works really well with RoboSat specifically. So I think, I mean, those are probably the main ones. Like I said, there's a hearing going on right now in New York for the Samurai Wallet folks. Hopefully they will be freed. Their case will be dropped. They can get back to building, and other privacy-focused companies will feel like they can stay in America or keep building in the open, as that kind of caused a lot of rippling effects in the space. But for now, I think
a lot of companies packed up and left based off the Samurai case.
Yeah, that week was wild. There was a Tornado Cash statement, there was the Samurai Wallet indictment and arrest, there was the FBI statement on not messing with basically it was saying like don't use non-KYC exchanges or entities, but it didn't explicitly say that. It just basically said like don't mess with people who don't have our stamp of approval. All that in 1 week, and then Phoenix leaving, Wasabi leaving, it was pretty wild to see. A good wake-up call for me to understand how easy it is for a nation state to shut down a lot of this like app level stuff. And that's another driver for me to get things like covenants in Bitcoin, because it allows us to build a lot more decentralized approaches to privacy and to scaling and to payments that don't rely on a central entity who a nation state can just go, you're done, and it goes away overnight.
Imagine this: the market's crashing, exchanges are freezing withdrawals, but you are cool as a cucumber because you are unruggable. By joining my Become Unruggable mentoring program, you will get one-on-one support to safely move your Bitcoin into self-custody. I'll guide you step by step at your own pace, as well as making sure you have a rock-solid recovery plan in place. Take control, stay sovereign, get in touch with me via X, Nostr, or send me an email at becomeunruggable@proton.me. And let's make you unruggable. In a world where water spills, fires rage, and pets chew everything in sight, only one thing can save your Bitcoin seed phrase: StampSeed. Don't let a coffee accident turn your Bitcoin into Bitcoin gone. With StampSeed, your seed phrase is engraved in metal, safe from elements, toddlers, and your own clumsiness. Use promo code BTCSTORY at stampseed.com for 15% off. Because in the end, metal always wins. And now, let's get back to the episode. I like how you pulled it back to covenants, where we started the circle of...
Everything comes back to covenants.
It does a full circle, it does indeed. I wanted to kind of respond back on your recommendations with BISC and RoboSat. So BISC, personally, I've never used. RoboSats, I tend to use most nowadays when I'm stacking sats. I find it really kind of very intuitive and very straightforward. But like as someone that's totally new, I personally recommend, and I wanted to hear your opinion. Am I doing the right thing or not? Like a platform such as like Hodl, which to me as a new person, like, because RoboSat still, it's like you need to, go through Tor and put it out, and then it looks a little bit, it's a little bit,
it's a little scary.
Cypherpunk is like, yeah, well, like what are these robot emojis, and like I'm rolling the dice here, and I'll put there's bonds involved and everything. It's like a little bit like, what's happening here? Like I need to have my initial steps, but with like Hodl, like I even get like, my parents could buy, KYC free on Hodl, and then in Europe there's like there's apps I don't know if you're big fans of apps, but like Peach Wallet, and there's like a few other ones. Like there's quite a few.
Vexel's another good one.
And Vexel, yeah. We're going to have Grafton on as well. Vexel's going more on kind of the real peer-to-peer, like meeting in person to exchange Bitcoin, which I really like.
Mm-hmm.
That hopefully if you have someone in your city that is looking to buy or sell Bitcoin, that's another problem to address. But yeah, what's your take on these kind of more kind of like easier P2P? Are they still also good, or they're not as kind of safe as, for example, RoboSats, which kind of goes through the whole Tor route of like really kind of removing any link to you through any IP tracking or whatnot?
Yeah, I mean, I would say they're fantastic options. Like honestly, the American in me kind of like removed a lot of options when I'm just thinking of this off the top of my head, because like we don't have access to any of that. Like HODL, Vexel, Peach, it's all verboten for US people for some stupid reason. So I don't have access to any of these, so I haven't actually used any of them.
Gotcha.
But I have heard absolutely fantastic things about Peach. I know many people who have used HODL. Like those are great tools. I think the way to kind of think about it is like Bisq and RoboSats are built to be the on-chain and the Lightning, you can't stop this option. Like there's no way you can shut down these two things because of the way that they're built, their reliance on Tor. Like they're just gonna function no matter what in some way. So those are kind of like the shit hits the fan, we have these tools no matter what. And you can use them today, and I use both, and I really appreciate them. For me, like in America, shit kind of has hit the fan with their options, like I said. So like I have to use Bisq or RoboSats right now. So it's a little tricky for some people in some jurisdictions. But if you have something like HODL, like Peach, Vexel, some good friends of mine are a key part of Vexel, like those are fantastic options and much, much more user-friendly. They are much more possible to shut down. If the EU laws change or something, like it could very easily go away overnight. So I wouldn't assume you'll always be able to use something like a Peach or a Vexel or a HODL. But while we can, you should 100% lean into that. Obviously, protect yourself. I mean, you could still use the Tor browser with HODL if you wanted. If you wanted to make sure that your IP isn't linked to your activity there, you could use a good VPN instead for something that's a little more user-friendly as well. Those are absolutely fantastic options. And I've used similar platforms in the past. Like there was a really good one for Monero called Local Monero for years, and its counterpart for Bitcoin called Agora Desk. And there was basically HODL, like peer-to-peer, but much simpler interface, much easier to use. And they were absolutely fantastic. But unfortunately, all those have been shut down in the US, basically. So there's none like that for us in the US, but thankfully in Europe and other parts of the world, there's still really good options. And I know there's like in a lot of different geographies, like in the global south, there's a lot of different, more local options where people will be able to direct you. If you have a Bitcoiner friend or someone, they'll be able to direct you to what the best option is. Yeah, Peach, HODL, Vexel are all ones I personally know people who have used and really enjoyed.
Awesome. So there you have it, guys. If you're new to Bitcoin and you're only starting your journey, delete that Strike app, delete that River app, and go and buy peer-to-peer. Like I see nearly like every day, like people setting screenshots, which first of all, it's a terrible idea to be showing screenshots of how much Bitcoin you're stacking.
Yes.
But then second of all, it's never like a peer-to-peer screenshot. It's always like River or like Strike purchase, and it's like, hey, this is going to cold storage, to the coldest of cold storage. And it's like, man, like you're like doing two things wrong. You're buying KYC Bitcoin and you're showing it to the whole world, which is like terrible OPSEC endeavors. But I guess people don't learn, they carry on doing. And there's always people in the comments, like also going over the comments, there's people like that are, you know, honestly telling them like, man, just delete this, like don't do it, like learn your lesson. And they're just happily like daily or weekly just posting new buys, getting that endorphin hit from all the likes they get for pressing one button, which is crazy, which is not even like Nostr where you're getting zaps, where you're getting sats for that. Like you're getting like meaningless likes and emojis that the numbers go up, but it does absolutely nothing to you. But yeah, I'm just like shocked how like people just carry on. But I guess not shocked. You had a great point, Seth. It's like the ease of these platforms, like how easy it is. You just go on, bam, link your card and put your DCA, whatever, weekly auto DCA, and they're just kind of like, I'm done here. In a lot of cases, they don't even withdraw to cold storage. They just keep on stacking it on and stacking it on and stacking it on, which is, which is pretty scary. Yeah. But anyways, I think one more little thing to add to, like, it's the most intimidating part about using these peer-to-peer exchanges is just using them for the first time.
Like once you actually use one of these, they're really not that hard. Like even RoboSats as one of the more complicated options is really easy. Like it's not complex. You just follow the instructions, you use a Lightning wallet that works with it, and things just kind of work. You chat with the person you're trading with to figure out exactly where to send them, whatever method you're using to pay for it. It's not complicated. It's just that initial barrier of entry that you always face when using some new technology. And you can kind of view peer-to-peer exchanges as a new technology because you've never bought an asset like that in the same way. If you've used like Facebook Marketplace or something, you've gotten at least somewhat close to that. And it's really kind of a similar experience. And I think people, if you just sit down, try it once, even if you don't have to commit right away to like delete your Strike account and use RoboSats exclusively for the rest of your life. Like just take a minute, try one of these, try the easiest ones first. HODL, Peach, Vexel, try one of those first if you can. If you can't, try something like RoboSats. If you absolutely have to, try Bisq, but it's definitely the hardest to get used to. And just try it a few times. Like get used to it, start with small amounts. Just like when you started your Bitcoin journey, like the first time you sent a transaction, you were flipping out. Like we all have been there about how terrifying that is.
The heart's like pounding the chest.
Yeah, like you've like verified every letter. You've like written it out. Like you've done everything. It's the same kind of thing. Like just try it, and then eventually you'll get to that point where where most Bitcoiners are at now, where they go to send a transaction, and it's just like subconscious. It's not even something. It's just kind of habit. You can just do it. You're still verifying, hopefully, that you're sending to the right address, because obviously there's still a tax. But it's that same kind of idea of like once you go through those motions and you actually build up some subconscious muscle memory, I guess, it gets really trivial. I definitely shouldn't have done this, but I've stacked sats on RoboSats while driving. Like it's definitely, it's doable. It's doable.
Well, maybe you were driving a Tesla on autopilot. Who knows? It wasn't on autopilot, no?
Too much of a surveillance vehicle for me, unfortunately. But they do look fun.
True. Seth, going back to the tracking of exchanges, like personal question out of interest, and I think you're a great person to ask this question. For example, if you buy KYC on Strike or River and you withdraw it to your cold storage, and then you buy something from someone, you send those sats to them. Essentially, how does like a centralized exchange know when you've actually given away your sats, or they don't, or they track it all the way, and in the end it ends up, let's say, used for illicit or like money laundering things, and then you hit the fan for someone else's spending, if you get what I mean? Is that something that people should be worried about?
Absolutely. Unfortunately. Yeah. I mean, it's certainly not a good place to be, but that is basically how it works. I mean, the hard thing, or I guess not the hard thing, the thing that people have to keep in mind here is that there are massive financial incentives to gather this data about what people do with their Bitcoin, and generally just what people do with their money is like that's like the number one data point, because what you do with your money tells so much about who you are. So like that has always been a central data focus for any government, for any nation state, for law enforcement. And that doesn't change with Bitcoin. And unfortunately, Bitcoin's transparent design means that it's pretty easy to do that. And the combination between the transparent design and governments wanting that data and private companies finding out that they can make a lot of money off governments by offering to collect that data, i.e. Chainalysis, you get this kind of unholy setup where they have clear financial incentives to surveil you, even after you've left the exchange. And we know that this is happening because we have many cases of people having exchange accounts shut down because they did something with their funds after they withdrew them to their own custody that were not allowed. That could be using a mixer or a CoinJoin tool. That could be sending funds to a darknet market. That could be something as non-nefarious as just using a peer-to-peer exchange after that. But they are surveilling those funds in the guise of protecting you and protecting other people in reality, because there's so much money at stake for this data collection system. And people like Chainalysis are working so hard to lobby law enforcement and governments to use them in contracts and to force exchanges to utilize them as well. So because that's happening, we know that they are surveilling both when you send funds in, Bitcoin in, or fiat obviously, but Bitcoin in, or when you withdraw Bitcoin, it's being followed for multiple hops afterwards. And the way that Bitcoin works right now, for most people, it's pretty trivial to know when a spend is actually to a different person versus if it's something where you're just like rotating to a new wallet or something. A lot of that happens based on like how you're selecting inputs. That could be based on the amounts. Like a really common, simple heuristic is looking for a rounded fiat or Bitcoin amount. Like if you're sending 1 million sats, it's very unlikely that you're just sending that to a different wallet. It's very likely you're making a payment. It's easy to distinguish change from the actual payment. You can use things like different script types. If you're sending to a SegWit, but you're using Taproot, you know that the change is going to go back to Taproot. So the SegWit spend is necessarily going to someone else's wallet. Obviously, there's some guessing involved depending on how complex things get, but there's so much money in this that there's been a lot of time and effort put into making sure that the tracing is as effective as possible. And Bitcoin by design makes it quite easy to actually do this. So a really good like real life example for people to think about. And again, not because I want to scare people or doom and gloom, but just because it's important to understand the real world ramifications of this transparency, and specifically of using KYC exchanges and then using your money for something else. So there's a case that the US government, the Department of Justice, is bringing against a particular person, Roman Simonov, I think is his last name, or Sterlingov, sorry. There's a few Romans under prosecution right now, unfortunately. Roman Sterlingov. They're alleging that he is the operator of Bitcoin Fog, which was a very popular centralized Bitcoin mixer, where basically you sent them your Bitcoin. They eventually sent you someone else's Bitcoin with the same amount minus a fee at the end of the day. So this was like the first approach to privacy in Bitcoin and has persisted till today. Is someone just runs a centralized service where they take people's Bitcoin and then they send you different Bitcoin that has a different history. Thus, you kind of get privacy, not from the operator, but from an outside observer. And according to the case, Roman Sterlingov is the operator of Bitcoin Fog. And they know this because some Bitcoin that they traced back through multiple hops to his KYC'd Mt. Gox account was used to purchase a domain that was the ClearNet domain for pointing people to Bitcoin Fog on the darknet.
And he bought it with Bitcoin.
Yeah, and allegedly he bought it with Bitcoin. The truth of the story, from talking to his lawyers, from hearing from him, looking at a lot of the case stuff, and obviously we don't necessarily know exactly what's true. So like obviously I assume that the government's wrong here because they have a lot of reasons to be wrong and to not worry about being wrong. But what seems to have actually happened is that Roman Sterlingov was actually a big advocate and user of peer-to-peer exchanges really early on. So he was doing face-to-face trades between Bitcoin and cash in very early days. So he was buying on Mt. Gox, and then when he would go to meetups, go to conferences, he would sell Bitcoin to people. And the very likely outcome is that he had used Mt. Gox, used his KYC account, he had bought Bitcoin, he had gone to an event, and he had sold Bitcoin to someone just like he had done many times before. But unfortunately, this time that someone was the operator of Bitcoin Fog, who then used that Bitcoin to buy the domain. He has no plausible deniability. He didn't have the wallet anymore to prove that those funds had left his wallet and gone to a different one. So on chain, there's just a trivial path to follow that these funds were yours, bought this thing. And the government via Chainalysis says that, and they don't have to prove how their tracing works. That was a big part of the case, is they weren't forced to reveal any information about how they actually trace and prove that this is what happened. And yet he was convicted anyways. So it's a very harrowing story. It's certainly not what you should be worried about using peer-to-peer exchanges. It's certainly an edge case, but it's a specific reminder of when we attach our ID to something that is transparent by design, there can be a lot of unintended side effects, even of what people do with that Bitcoin after you send it to them, which is a crazy thought. And it's just another reason why we both need to use the tools that we have available, both by using these no KYC exchanges that we talked about, these peer-to-peer exchanges, and that we need to build better privacy tools. And I'll keep circling back to covenants. Covenants are a way we can do that.
For sure. You gave me goosebumps with that story. I mean, I've come across his story like from top level, but I didn't know like the TLDR, like essentially how it went from essentially what you just described, from him most probably, buying those coins on empty Gox and then, selling them someone peer to peer, and then someone goes and uses it in an illicit way. And now he's facing, jail time and basically being put into a cage because of someone else's dues. I guess let me rephrase the last question, which was, what do we tell someone that's about to start their journey? What happens to the people that are already on their journey and did their mistake like you and I have as well, buying coins on centralized exchanges? I still also personally, I have some, I don't like to admit it, but I still have some Strike coins when Strike came about, and I went to try it out. It was fairly easy, but now I'm sitting on these Strike coins. And to my knowledge, there is no like active whirlpools like we had before with the mixing. There is actually, it's a two-part question. So what do we do with KYC coins? And the second one Do you have any experience with using the jam, the coin market on Start9? Because I think that's the only one, at least that I came across, running my Start9 that I saw that's available there. So what do we do, Mr. Seth, with KYC coins? Do we just sit on them and wait for some implementation to happen, or is there some options we could do?
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on kind of what you're most concerned about. Like a lot of it comes back to threat modeling and like, are you most concerned about a nation state seizure of Bitcoin, which is getting more and more possible with the SBR and the ways that they're able to accumulate Bitcoin essentially being civil asset forfeiture and seizure? It's a little terrifying. That is certainly a risk. So like if that's your main risk or your main concern, then the way that you approach KYC coins is going to differ from someone whose main concern is, I want to be able to spend these coins with privacy or have privacy from that point on. Because
Second
like
point, probably, because I don't think everyone's too like concerned at the moment with like the nation state knocking down your door to ask you where's your seed phrase and cold storage to get your coins.
Yeah,
at least
yet.
now.
Not yet. Yeah,
Not
we'll
yet.
see. We'll see. But yeah, I mean, you're definitely right. I think that's not the primary concern for most people. So for most people, I think like you need to understand that you can't erase the history that you bought these coins in KYC. So like the only two options really have are either you keep them and you just keep them as part of your stack, or you sell them back to the exchange to kind of reset, and then you move on to doing only no KYC, which is an option. Obviously, that might be painful depending on exactly how much you have. If you have a small amount, that might be relatively trivial to get peer-to-peer and just kind of reset and start from zero, or it might not be trivial. So that's, again, kind of up to personal preference. I think the normal path is you already have KYC coins. Okay. Maybe you even continue to increase the size of your KYC stack, which I wouldn't recommend, but maybe you do. But you can have two separate buckets. Like a really common concept in basically every Bitcoin wallet is the concept of accounts. And what you can do is you can have an account for your KYC funds. So you withdraw from whatever your KYC exchange is, you withdraw them to your KYC account, and you make sure that you never move funds into or out of that are not connected to your ID, because necessarily they would be connected on chain to your ID at that point. And then you use another account for your non-KYC coins. So everything you buy peer-to-peer for hopefully most of your spending, so that you're not connecting your ID to the things you actually purchase or your financial activity. And you just keep those two things separate. If you want to keep stacking KYC, you do it. You withdraw to cold storage to your KYC account. And on the no KYC side, you can keep stacking, keep it separate there. And honestly, that's like the simplest, most people could do that today approach. And that's what most people I talk to do. They don't like erase the history of KYC by resetting, which you can't really do, but they don't like reset there and then just start from zero. Most people keep what they have via KYC and they start stacking while avoiding KYC. And I think that's the path pretty much everyone can and should take. And then just decide if you want to be like hardcore, yeah, you can sell back your KYC stack and go full peer-to-peer. But I know that's not for everyone. Now, as for like what you can do for privacy after you withdraw into storage, that's where like there's just not really a good recommendation right now, unfortunately, for on-chain privacy. Because like we talked about, Whirlpool was shut down last April. Whirlpool or Wasabi themselves shut down as a company. There are people running Wasabi Wallet coordinators that you can use with Wasabi Wallet, the wallet software. There's been a lot of problems with both tracing, fee theft, bugs. Like there's been a lot of issues with that.
Shigaru launched a few months ago, right? Which is
yes, but not with any
CoinJoin. No.
So it's basically just like the non-collaborative post, or just the post-mix spending tools, and then the regular Samurai Wallet stuff, but no Whirlpool. Yeah, unfortunately. Maybe that will come back. I don't know. It would be a very bold move to run.
But on Wasabi, going to another like privacy wallet, like there is independent, what are they called? Coordinators. Have you had any experience with that? Because Wasabi themselves, they don't run it, but like, is that safe or is that not safe, or kind of what's the take on that?
Yeah. My general recommendation is not to use it. Okay. Not because necessarily it's bad, but because there's a lot of trust in the coordinator that you use. Technically not for privacy, but even with that, there was a bug in Wasabi Wallet for a couple years, I think, that basically meant that the coordinator could know the incoming and outgoing transaction, essentially like demix the transactions. So like that bug is fixed, but who's to say there's not another, or who's to say that there's not some malicious exploit that a coordinator has found? You do, like, the way that CoinJoin works right now is you trust a central coordinator with some things. Theoretically, you're not trusting them with your privacy, but that can break down as well. Hopefully we get to a world where the privacy tools that we use do not require trust in a central coordinator, like Monero works without trusting any central entity. Ethereum via Tornado Cash was able to achieve good privacy without trusting a central entity. There are ways to do this, but they're basically impossible on Bitcoin right now. Covenants make that easier, but I don't want to keep rehashing covenants. Right now, you trust the coordinator quite a bit. And because you don't have a single trusted coordinator with clear financial incentives to both not be malicious and to not Sybil attack, to introduce fake liquidity into the mixes to try and see who's who, it's really dangerous right now. Amongst the other bugs that have happened with the coordinators that were able to essentially change the mix so that you would spend all of your money in fees to the coordinator over time and not get any money back for yourself with privacy. Like, it's just not, I know that they've fixed like all these bugs that I'm mentioning. So I don't want to say that like it'll never be good, or that you even necessarily, that there's no one who should use it today, but I don't like the track record of the Wasabi folks, and I don't like the track record of the decentralized coordinators right now.
So the best thing is just separate your stack, have an account called the reckless account, which is your KYC coins, and then the sovereign one, which is your KYC free ones, right?
Basically, yeah. You can use Join Market. You mentioned Jam, which is the kind of the web UI for Join Market, which you can run on a Start9, or I think Umbrel has it too. I think most of those have the ability to run it. And it is an option, but I've done a lot of testing and a lot of reading on it, and to get a good level of privacy, it's very expensive. So at 1 cent per VByte right now, it's probably a reasonable tool, even if not the most user-friendly. It's probably a reasonable tool, but as fees increase at all, it gets really, really, really expensive.
So you'd spend like 50% of your stash to get it.
It's a lot. Private. I've spent a lot on fees testing Join Market. Some of that was due to bugs. A little bit of that was due to user error. A lot of that was just due to the architecture of Join Market. Because basically, like in Join Market, you can be either a taker or a maker. Like, people make an offer of, I want to let people mix with my funds, or I want to mix with other people's funds.
No.
And if you're the taker, which most people would be, because it doesn't require you to be online 24/7, it doesn't require bonds and a lot of other stuff that goes on when you're a maker. When you do that, you're paying for 7 to 9 other people's inputs for every transaction that you make. And you need to make multiple of those to gain any serious level of privacy. So you're talking about, like, for one input that you want to gain privacy on,
it's like 45 transactions plus.
Yeah, or that many inputs, yeah. So you could say, like, let's say I wanted to do this 5 times, which provides hopefully a good level of privacy. You're having to pay for 45 other inputs for your one input to gain privacy. So it's a very, very expensive system. You can offset that by being a maker, which you can do when you're running Jam yourself. But that has a lot of its own complexity. It requires you to keep funds online at all times on a hot wallet. There's just, I wish there was just a good answer.
All the time.
Yeah, all the time. Yeah, that's the only way to make it work. So it's like, it's a cool technology, but in the real world, it's just not. It's not really functional, unfortunately.
Pops and Groms are not going to be makers and takers, right?
No, they're not.
Awesome, Seth. Well, I mean, on the topic of Freedom Tech, what are some other exciting developments and tools that are kind of being developed and helping us with, preserving our privacy and sovereignty? Maybe perhaps some of those being in Cakewallet as well, since we haven't touched upon too much on Cakewallet. But what are some exciting things that are currently happening that you wanted to share with the audience?
Yeah, for sure. As you can tell, my hatred of marketing extends to me being a really bad shill for my own company. So I barely even brought up Cakewallet at all. But yeah, I mean, some things that I'm really excited for. I mean, obviously silent payments, like we touched on. It's been really early days, but with Josie on board advising us and helping us to build out much better infrastructure around it and a much better experience, I'm really excited for what 2025 is going to hold for silent payments, especially as we get to spread that to the broader community and get it to be, I mean, like, in my opinion, silent payment should not be viewed as a privacy improvement. It is, but that's fairly marginal. But really, it should be viewed as just a way better way to do Bitcoin wallets and addresses. Like, the whole system of us, yeah, It's much more intuitive as well. Like when you talk about this concept, like when you've been a Bitcoiner for a long time, it's just like second nature to like, yeah, my address changes every time, but it's all going to the same place. But like you onboard someone new and like this concept of like, why is my address changed? Like, is the money going to go to the same place? Like, how does this work? Will I be able to spend it? Like, it's terrifying as opposed to when you're using something like Venmo or Cash App where you just have a username and the money goes to the place, you get the money. Like we need to get there, and we can actually get there with silent payments because you can have a single static address where I think in the long term, no one's going to see the actual silent payment address. Like no one's, it's a really long address. No one's going to be verifying the whole thing anyways. Ideal future is that we shift away from these changing Bitcoin addresses. I have to send you a signal message to figure out where to pay you the next time. We shift away from that. We shift to usernames in Bitcoin. This is something we're working towards in Cake, but with silent payments on the on-chain side, where we can have a static reusable address that doesn't compromise privacy. With Bolt 12 on the Lightning side, where we can have a static reusable offer that doesn't compromise privacy, we can finally do things like actually have a username that does not reveal anything about your on-chain activity or your off-chain activity, but lets people pay you anytime by just entering that username. We already have a lot of this functionality in Cake right now, not on the Bolt 12 side because we don't have Lightning yet. Obviously, we have silent payments, but we've had support for a lot of different aliasing services. BIP353 is kind of the latest Bitcoin-specific approach to that. But there's been a generalized cryptocurrency one called OpenAlias for a long time that's been supported in Cake. We have things like BirdPay, where if you have an address in your Twitter bio or in your pinned message or your pinned tweet, anyone who enters your Twitter username can just pay to that immediately. And that works beautifully with silent payments because instead of just a static Bitcoin address where everyone can just copy paste into mempool.space and see how much Bitcoin people have given me, with a silent payment, that's not possible. So that future, I think, will become a reality in some way in 2025. And we're trying to lead the charge there at Cakewallet, where we can shift away from this like confusing address system and shift to usernames, but not in a way that compromises privacy. Because all the previous approaches to this, a lot of like LN URL and Lightning addresses, all required centralized servers or custodial wallets or compromising in some way. We can finally like get away from that and do things in the right way. So like we should be able to basically do cash tags, but it's decentralized, non-custodial Bitcoin, peer-to-peer. So it's an amazing future, and it's something that's like finally all the pieces are coming together in 2025. So I'm really excited for that. Bolt 12, obviously, like I mentioned, being a key part of that on the Lightning side, which has been around for ages, but is finally actually becoming a reality now. So that's really exciting. I think the other thing that's exciting as well, and I'm really curious to see like what adoption looks like at the end of the year, is PayJoin V2. So for like a really quick TLDR, PayJoin is, we've been talking about CoinJoin a good bit already throughout the episode. PayJoin is basically like a two-party collaborative transaction, a two-party CoinJoin, where let's say like I want to pay for your mentoring service, you run a BTC Pay server. When I go to pay, if you have PayJoin enabled, we can construct a transaction together where we actually both contribute inputs to the same transaction. So you as the receiver are also one of the senders in the transaction. It sounds really weird at first, but the way that the transaction is actually constructed, it hides who the true spender is, like who's actually contributing money. It hides.
Looks like an internal transfer, basically.
It does. Yeah, it just looks like a regular Bitcoin transaction. You can't tell it's a CoinJoin. You can't tell it's a PayJoin. You can't tell anything specific about it. It just looks like a regular I'm paying money to someone transaction, when in reality, it's me paying you and hiding the sender, the receiver amount, and the amount in the transaction.
Also, the amount is not even disclosed on Explorer.
No, it's not on chain because the way that you can actually do it is you're contributing different amounts as inputs, and you can actually handle it so that the outputs equal out, but not in a way that's visible on chain because of the way you actually handle change back to each person. It's really, really cool. So the amount's not visible on chain either.
So what amount is shown on Explorer?
So you see the total amount that is going to different places, but you don't know the actual amount of the payment. So like if I paid you 100,000 sats on chain, it could look like 275,000 sats changed hands because you contributed 175,000 sats. I contributed 100,000. It's all going to you. So you're fine with paying yourself the 175,000. It can balance out so that on chain, it looks like an amount that's not actually really what happened in changing.
Interesting.
Ownership. Yeah. It's a really, really cool tool. There was a V1 which had a lot of problems. And that was tried for a while. That's what's available in BTC Pay today. But Dan Gould has been working tirelessly on a V2 version that's just had the BIP accepted and is finally starting to take off. We've been working on implementing that at Cake. The folks over at Bull Bitcoin have been awesome to
I was
work
going to
with.
say, I saw Francis a few months ago when he mentioned it on Oster with Bull Bitcoin enabling it. But I believe it's only from when you withdraw it to your Bull Bitcoin wallet, right? You can't like withdraw it to like a Sparrow wallet or whatnot.
Eventually they're going to enable it for more. Right now it's like, so for some background, there was a bounty from the HRF for implementing PayJoin. And so Bull Bitcoin basically shipped a little earlier than they were planning to make sure that they could get the bounty, which is totally understandable. It's a reasonable thing. It's essentially free sats. So they shipped before they were really ready to do that.
Okay.
So it's very simple right now. What they're going to do, and their long-term plan is awesome, is that every withdrawal from Bull Bitcoin, the exchange, to Bull Bitcoin, the wallet, will be a PayJoin. And this has massive impacts to privacy for the end user and to fees as well, because you can essentially use PayJoin not just as a privacy tool, but also as a batching tool to help cut down the costs for the exchange and thus for the end user actually withdrawing. So that's kind of their long-term vision. They're not there yet at all. Right now, it's very trivial PayJoin support that honestly I would recommend not using at this point. But that's a lot of that is really just, again, they're first movers, just like we were first movers on silent payments. There's a lot of edge cases and improvements that happen once you actually deploy to users. And we've been going through a lot of the same stuff internally as we've been working towards releasing PayJoin. We'll probably have PayJoin out early April, I would think, maybe mid-April at the latest.
Oh, that's not that far away. I was going to ask you when is it on the books for Cakewallet to have PayJoin, but it's literally around the corner.
We could have shipped a version I was very unhappy with before December, before Bull Bitcoin. We've been working on it for probably about 6 months now, but I'm just not, like, one of the core tenets of how I approach leading at Cake is like, we're not going to ship something we're not really happy with internally. Like we're just not going to do it. So it just wasn't to that state yet. We needed to do a lot of work. The fantastic people working on the PayJoin dev kit, the upstream library that we're using and Bull Bitcoin's using, they had to do a lot of work, honestly. There's just a lot of growing pains as you actually take something from concept to library to like actual wallet implementation with users. There's just a lot of stuff that happens. So there's been a lot of back and forth between the three of us. Bull Bitcoin have been fantastic to work with as well, trying to iron that out and get those issues fixed. So yeah, I think we'll have something. We'll at least have a public beta probably by the end of this month. And then I would think that a full release will probably be like April at the latest. But I am excited for that. It's something that requires more wallets to support it for it to be useful. Like if it's only Bull Bitcoin and Cake, it's not going to have that much of an impact on broader Bitcoin privacy. But again, this is free and open source. All the work that Bull Bitcoin did to implement it contributed back to the ecosystem. All the work that we're doing contributes back to the ecosystem. All the work that Bull Bitcoin and us have done with the PayJoin team who are building out the dev kit, that's all helping to improve that, so that every time we keep moving, it gets easier and easier, more and more foolproof, better and better documentation. And so I think we'll hit a good stride probably by the end of the year of better PayJoin adoption, and that becoming more of a normal way for people to actually send money to each other, not just merchants and end users, but actually just I'm sending you money as a friend, and we use a PayJoin, and we just don't even think about it. Is like the end goal there.
Nice. I like that. That's a nice development on the privacy front and efficiency of paying for fees front. I got one more question regarding the personal question that just came to my mind as we were discussing the Cakewallet. Presuming there is in-app, within Cakewallet swaps, right? You can swap between different currencies. What are the, and this is some questions I see people talking about, like switching from Bitcoin to Monero and Monero back to Bitcoin to kind of clean their trace. Is that a bad idea to do, to switch your Bitcoin to Monero and then Monero back to Bitcoin, for example, through using Cakewallet or any other swap function? What's your take on that, Seth?
Yeah, honestly, it's a very common question because I think people think of it sort of like a VPN.
An easy way
for their money.
To clean out.
Yeah, it seems like it on its face. Unfortunately, it's not that simple. So, I mean, it would benefit Cake greatly for everyone to be swapping to Monero and back to Bitcoin. So if you want to do it, go for it. But from a privacy perspective, because of Bitcoin's transparency, it doesn't work very well. Because when you think about kind of the big picture, we've talked a lot about the specifics of what can be traced on Bitcoin. But when you think about like let's say I swap to Monero and then I swap back to Bitcoin. I have half a Bitcoin, I swap to Monero, I get whatever half a Bitcoin of Monero is. Sometime later, I swap back to Bitcoin, I get half a Bitcoin minus some change back to a different wallet. Yes, does it break the link for a simple like grandma going on mempool.space and Googling your Bitcoin address? Like, yes, it does provide privacy against that. So like it has some benefits, but it doesn't, it's very easy to trace across that for someone like Chainalysis. Obviously, the centralized exchange that you would use to make the swap also knows that that is probably the same person. The amount-based heuristics, the timing heuristics that can be used there make it pretty trivial to actually trace through it. Again, if your threat model, like you need to think about what's important to you. If your threat model is just like, when I pay my friend Bob, I don't want him to know how much Bitcoin I have, that maybe is a reasonable approach. Lightning is probably easier.
Even better.
Probably, again, there's lots of caveats. Lightning's privacy is really hard to quantify, and the way that most people use Lightning is not private. But that's probably the better approach. Like using something like Phoenix or Zeus is probably going to be better for that use case. It would work for that to swap back and forth between Monero and Bitcoin. But it's just, if you're going anything past that, like even just mass surveillance by Chainalysis, they're gonna connect the dots there and have a very, very, very reasonable guess that the same person is on one side of the Bitcoin transaction as the other Bitcoin transaction. So it's not great at that. I mean, the like actually useful way to use Monero for privacy is that like
go
you
in
don't
and
just
not go out.
Yeah, go in and not go out. But I'm not saying like swap all of your Bitcoin for Monero. Like I'm not pitching that you store your life savings in Monero. But what it is really useful for is that it has very, very, very wide acceptance. Like behind Bitcoin and Ethereum, there's no other cryptocurrency that has better acceptance than Monero. So if you're actually into using Bitcoin or using cryptocurrencies, Monero is a fantastic tool for that. It provides strong privacy by default. You don't have to think about it. You don't have to go through any extra hoops. You just use any Monero wallet you want. Obviously, that can be Cakewallet, and you gain very strong privacy. So like the simple answer is, if a concern for you is financial privacy when you're actually spending, just swap some Bitcoin into Monero at the beginning of every month or whenever you need to top up your wallet. Spend it on all the things you love. I bought a ton of delicious beef jerky from somebody a couple of days ago. Like I can pay for almost all of my online services and subscriptions with Monero. I can pay for pretty much anything in the space. I mean, a lot of the merchants that you know and love for selling stuff for Bitcoin also support Monero. For anything that I can't, I can buy a gift card with Monero. You can do all this in Cakewallet through CakePay, which is our gift card service. You can buy a gift card for, say, Amazon. The vast majority of like my Amazon spending is all coming with gift cards that I fund with Monero. Sometimes Bitcoin as well, but normally Monero. And then you can even just buy a prepaid debit card as well to be able to spend on whatever you want, load it into Apple Pay or Google Pay. So like if you're really looking for that spending, Monero's the easiest hop there. But I would say, like, as someone who is a huge Monero fan and has been in the Monero community longer than the Bitcoin community, like you can get good enough in Bitcoin by avoiding KYC and by leveraging good Lightning wallets like Phoenix and Zeus, and then doing those same things. Like merchants that accept Bitcoin, you can obviously pay with Zeus and Phoenix. Like you can still buy debit cards, gift cards to be able to spend at more places using those no KYC sats, and your identity is never linked to those directly. So like you can get good enough there, but the simplicity of Monero is beautiful, and that's the reason why, even though I'm like a technical, been in Bitcoin for a long time, know all the tools guy, I still just use Monero because it's just way easier.
I like it. That's some great advice. And I guess one of the final topics on the topic of privacy, and I guess we didn't touch upon it too much, but maybe just a few minutes. I want to hear your takes on it. Something that's been very popular in the last 12 months and is particularly private on aspect of Bitcoin is eCash, right? And the eCash mints. What's your take on that, Seth, in regards to kind of like making it most private? I know there's some caveats and there's some, you need to trust the custodian of the mint with it. But then again, you get, from my understanding at least, you get like near perfect privacy where nobody knows who's exchanging with who until, of course, you opt out of the mint. What's your take on the whole eCash growth?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's one that I've talked about quite a bit over the last year. I'm good friends with Calais. I love the dude. He does fantastic work. He's absolutely brilliant. We've met many times in person, and I really appreciate him, but I am foremost among eCash haters. The reason being, and I'll kind of lay out my case. The big flaw to me with eCash is the obvious one. It requires a custodian. The only way that eCash works, the way it has always worked, is that someone takes custody of your Bitcoin and they give you an IOU. They give you a cryptographically signed note that says you have this many Bitcoin, but they have the Bitcoin. They can just turn off the mint, walk away, and they have your money. This has already happened multiple times with eCash mints, even though we're very, very early in the eCash space.
The ruggers keep on rugging, eh, Seth?
Yeah. I mean, it seems like most of them have been either unintentional, like mistakes, or an intentional phase out, like I don't want to be in this anymore kind of sense. But some have also just gone offline suddenly and everybody's money's gone. That's the key caveat. Like I think there is no point or benefit to working on custodial tools. Custodians are going to work on those tools. Like banks are going to be here, institutions are here, governments are here, centralized KYC exchanges are here. They have their own incentives to build custodial tools. And guess what? Their incentives are also that those custodial tools will not provide privacy. So I think the incentives of eCash are just totally broken from my perspective, because it's essentially, I think, pretty cypherpunk Bitcoiners building tools that they hope custodians will use, but those custodians, they don't want their users to have privacy, generally. And they don't want to use anything that adds complexity to their tech stack, which eCash does at that, even if it's relatively simple. So like when I think about it, I think it's a waste of Bitcoiners' resources. And I think it's ultimately dangerous from the perspective of it continues to cement this idea that custody is fine as long as we do X. And like thinking that we have to give up custody to achieve privacy it's just a cope from Bitcoiners, I think, because it's this mentality of like, well, we give up, we're not going to change Bitcoin. What can we do in the meantime? Custody is the easy way because you can do anything. When you take custody of people's funds, you can build whatever you want on top of it. And it creates this cool playground, but it's one that's outside of reality, because I don't think custodians have any incentive to adopt it. And anyone running a eCash mint is very clearly breaking financial regulations across the world. Like it's a very poor legal decision as well.
It's a slippery slope.
Yeah, I don't see an incentive there, especially when there are useful privacy tools. Like I want all that dev time that we're spending on eCash, all that time we're spending talking about it, focus more on self-custodial Lightning, focus more on Bolt 12 adoption, focus more on getting covenants across the line so that we can actually make something like Arc a useful and user-friendly tool. Let's figure out the ways that we can do things in a self-custodial way, because the time we have to actually build those tools is rapidly diminishing, I think. And focusing any of that time on custodians is I think a net loss. But like I understand the draw though, because it's a really interesting tool. You can build a lot of things and the privacy is near perfect, but it's near perfect from the custodian. And I think this is a piece that's often forgotten, is that it doesn't change the way that Bitcoin works on chain. So yes, you have near perfect privacy from the custodian, from the person operating the mint. And then theoretically you can use Lightning out of that mint to send funds elsewhere. And that can provide good, like really good privacy. But the problem is your Bitcoin on chain still went into a mint. Everyone knows that it went into that mint. Most mints publish their balance or publish their addresses. So the on-chain footprint is still there. Like people know if you went from Coinbase to eCash mint X, Coinbase knows that you're using that mint. If there's not many people using that mint, it's going to be pretty trivial to see what you're doing with that mint, especially if you ever withdraw. If you're the only person who ever put in 1 Bitcoin and then suddenly you take out 0.89 Bitcoin and no one else has that much, it's probably you. Like there's a lot of stuff that just still breaks down because of how transparent Bitcoin is. So it doesn't fix everything. It's basically just a better wallet of Satoshi is like the best case you should think of, is that it's a better wallet of Satoshi, which to me is still a bad thing. We're not here for custodians. We're here for actual money that we can control. And I don't want to give up that control, even if it means achieving privacy, because if I really want privacy that's near perfect, but doesn't sacrifice custody, I can use Monero. And I know that's like the bugaboo to talk about with others, but it's just the reality. And it's a reality that far more people are embracing, not just Monero, but this kind of multi-crypto world, who actually are seeking freedom. Like not just the like the degen gamblers, yeah, whatever. Like they've been in the multi-crypto thing for a long time and always will be. But there's this reality where like combining the best parts of different cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin and Monero can provide much greater freedom than one or the other. I'm not only in Monero, I'm not only in Bitcoin, because I think the symbiosis there is just magnificent and fits all of my needs personally. Maybe it doesn't fit everyone's needs, but it fits mine personally, and it doesn't require me giving up custody. And that's really like, that is a non-starter for me. If there's a loss of custody involved, it's not interesting or useful to me, and I don't think it should be pursued.
I think you brought up a great point, like this extremism, especially in the Bitcoin maxi camp, where it's just like Bitcoin and everything else is a shitcoin. I'm not touching anything. No Monero, no USDT, no nothing. I think that could be kind of, it works against you because you have these beautiful privacy tools available at your fingertips, but because you have this moral stance on Bitcoin or die, like I'm dying on this hill, you never go down that route, which I don't think it's the right way. You know, like I don't associate myself as a Bitcoin maxi, which I used to. I associate myself as a freedom maxi. So if I happen to have to use Monero, which to be honest, I haven't yet. I haven't had the case where I had to, but let's say in the future, I do want to make it more private with the services that I pay for Bitcoin today. Like I use Lightning, self-custodian Lightning through my Albi hub. Perfectly fine. Like I'm not really worried about anything. I'm not really hiding from anyone. But if I want to kind of take it up a notch, I always know Monero's there. And you know, it could be a logical step. I'm not this, you know, Bitcoin only and nothing else. But I think we touched upon a lot of good points, Seth, on this episode. We're rounding up to 1.5 hours. I want to thank you for taking the time to coming back on. Any final thoughts or messages you want to leave the listeners on regarding Bitcoin and privacy?
I think the big one probably is just, I hopefully wasn't too scary. I feel like sometimes can fall down this rabbit hole of like these real world examples of how scary this stuff can be. But like, it's thankfully most people in the world today are not, you're not in North Korea. Like you're not facing this totalitarian regime right now. So you have a lot more flexibility. Thankfully, there are fantastic tools today, and the tools are getting better and better every day for both just broader personal privacy and privacy within Bitcoin and the broader cryptocurrency ecosystem. I think the biggest thing I would leave people with is like, don't get scared either by like the lack of privacy that you have right now, or get scared by how intimidating some of the tools can seem at first. Because like I'm telling you, the place that we're at right now with the tools that are available to you, both again in Bitcoin and just broader personal privacy, is like compared to where we were at 10 years ago in the terms of user experience, in terms of accessibility. It's much easier to get started taking your privacy seriously. So like just think about what are some simple steps you can do. Maybe that's like we talked about, trying out HODL or Peach or Vexel or RoboSats for the first time, and just like putting in a concerted effort. Like you care enough about your future to worry about self-custody. I hope most people, I feel like listening to this, probably have. So you care enough about that. And if you think about it, like the way that you enable the most impact from your self-custody is that you ensure that no one has easy means available to see what you're doing with that money. Because ultimately, if you have control over who has access to data about what you're doing with that money, you have a lot more power from that stack that you've been stacking. And so think of like privacy as just enhancing the benefits you're getting from Bitcoin and self-custody, and put the same time and effort into it as you did into just the simple process of stacking and withdrawing to self-custody. So just take some time to do that. Like really just starting with a peer-to-peer exchange, I think would be a no-brainer and a huge win if everyone listening to this tried one of those tools and just put in the time to actually make a trade. Like make a trade, start small, figure it out, and just see which one's for you. Is there one that fits? Maybe there's not. Maybe none of them are a good fit for you. But then at least you can say like, hey, I tried these. Like these are the pain points, and this is why it's not for me. And like that's okay. Like it doesn't have to be for you today. But then also, if something shifts in your country down the line, and you need a more resistant or resilient way to sell or buy Bitcoin, you'll know, oh, I used RoboSats way back when. Let me go and check out if that's still available. Oh, it is. I understand this process because I've done it before. Like you're going to benefit a lot from that as well. So I think that would be the biggest thing. Just like keep taking that time to improve yourself, not just when it comes to self-custody, but also when it comes to privacy, both personal privacy and on-chain.
Amazing. There you have it, Seth. And for people that want to learn more about Seth's wisdom on privacy and follow your journey and all the amazing stuff you guys are doing at Cakewallet, where's the best place to send our listeners?
Yeah, best place is, so if you're on, I keep saying Twitter. I'll probably say Twitter forever.
I also call it Twitter forever. It's
X,
the Bluebird.
Twitter, formerly Twitter, whatever you want to call it. If you're there, at Seth for Privacy is my account on Twitter, where I'll post pretty much anything that I'm thinking about or building. At Cakewallet for following us to see what we're building at Cakewallet and keep up with updates there. If you want to just dive into our website, sethforprivacy.com. I have a ton of blog posts and guides for doing a lot of stuff with privacy tools. I would say if you're new to personal privacy, I have a blog post called Privacy First Steps on my blog.
Perfect. We'll
And
link
I've
that in
heard
the
that
show
it's really,
notes.
really useful.
I think that would be perfect for
Yeah, sweet.
beginners.
I think that's one that's just it was like me basically saying, if I was to start my journey into privacy today, knowing what I know now, but starting from scratch, how would I approach it? And I think it's a really useful way to like go piece by piece and not just dive headfirst into the privacy rabbit hole, but figure out exactly what's the best for you and see an example of kind of how I would approach it. So I think that would be a good one there, amongst other more technical guides and stuff for self-hosting, a lot of different things there. And then obviously cakewallet.com as well if you want to learn more about Cakewallet. Download it, give it a try, give me feedback. You'll get direct support from the VP if you shoot me a DM on Twitter or harass me about something that you want to see changed. So I'll be there.
Amazing. Perfect. Thanks a lot, Seth. Once again, thank you for all the work that you're doing. Thanks for taking the time out of your busy schedule to come on and rip on your Bitcoin story. And I look forward to having you back in the future because maybe we'll do another one once Covenants gets into effect as a little celebration. Would love to have you back.
I like it. Sounds good, man. Thank you so much, Gigi. Absolutely fantastic conversation as always. Really appreciate your approach and I'm glad to be able to jump on and chat.
Thank you so much. Likewise. Speak to you soon. Thank you for tuning in. If this episode resonated with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with others who might benefit too. Your support keeps us going, and we appreciate it. See you in the next one.